All right, welcome back to Daily Bible with Chris, where our follow-up video from our reading today from Job chapter 6. We read 5 chapters through chapter 10. And so we're going to go back through and give a little further context and explanation, commentary, study, whatever you want to call it, on each of these 5 chapters, just so we have a better understanding of what we've read. Because in all honesty, Job can be a very difficult book to completely understand. And I would be lying if I said I completely grasped every bit of the book of Job. But that's why we study, so that we can learn and get something new out of it every time that we read. And another revelation can come to us through the reading of the Word, through the illumination of the Holy Spirit. So, as I often say with these follow-up videos, if you've not already read through those 5 chapters or listened to my previous video where I read through those chapters, I would encourage you to pause this video, do that first, and then come back through here for if you desire to have a little further kind of a talk through what we've read in those chapters. And again, I would like to thank you for watching the video. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to the channel so that you get the daily uploads of these videos. Maybe hit that like button, hit that notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section. Would love to hear from you and how God is using the reading of His Word to impact your life. If there's something I could pray for you about, drop that in the comment section. I'd be happy to pray for you as well. So let's dive back into this again. Just setting the stage again. The book of Job is considered by many to be probably the oldest book in the Bible, just based on how it's written and some of the terminology used. We don't know specifically where Job, this man Job, is described. We don't know specifically what time frame he lived. It could be he is. It seems to be that he may be a predecessor of Moses, meaning he lived long before Moses, possibly at the same time as Abraham, maybe even later during the other times of the other patriarchs. But I know there's some that believe it may have been the time of the coming into the promised land as well, which would put them after Moses. But I think the general consensus is that it tends to take place during the time of Abraham. Where exactly this land of Uz that he lived in is debated. There's not a clear, concrete. They haven't found a road marker yet, I guess, that says this is the land of Uz. It's thought, based on some of the readings, that even some that we're going to read today, it's somewhere east of Lebanon, but it doesn't really matter. We trust that there was a place called Uz, there was a man named Job, and that he went through all of these things. And we see this almost courtroom drama taking place where the accuser, Satan, is going to come and come against Job before the Lord. Job has been blessed, and Satan, in his role as the accuser of the brethren, is just going to tell God, if you just let me hurt him and take away everything that you've blessed him with, Job will curse you. And so that kind of sets the stage, and he has everything taken away from him. And Job is in a state of despondency and grief and pain and anguish and suffering. And so it's just, this book here serves to help each of us to know that even God's children, even those who do the right thing, will experience suffering. We're going to experience pain, because this world we live in is not perfect. This is not the Garden of Eden type world that God intended for us to live in. One day He's going to make everything right, and there'll be no more pain and suffering and tears and grief and sorrow and sin any longer. But that isn't yet. That's not the world we live in. So this world is not perfect. Yes, it has beauty. Yes, it has some elements of that creation, obviously. And there are some good things that God does in this world, but there's a lot of evil and bad and sin. And we see through this book that God is working even through suffering. He's working as behind the scenes there. And He uses suffering. There's suffering or loss or pain or grief or whatever it might be. These things, the difficulties that we go through in life, God uses them to, could be a correction to sin, which is what Job's friends are going to think. It's a correction of sin, but it can also be used in other ways to test us, to help us to grow, to try us, to try our faith. Because as I said previously, a faith that can't be tested is a faith that can't be trusted. And so we see here that Job is here. He's sitting out, more than likely out in the city dump, in the ash heap. He is broken out in sores from head to toe from a disease that he has. He's literally scraping the sores on his body. He's lost all of 10 of his children. He's lost every bit of financial resource he had. Even his wife has sort of abandoned him in some ways. And he has 3 friends that have come. They've sat with him silently. But now, after a period of time, they begin to speak. We've already heard from Eliphaz, who, again, His words often are truthful, but they're not applied properly in Job's situation. And this is important to understand. We have information in this book that while this is going on in real time for Job and his friends and his wife and such, we have information they don't have. And obviously, when you're missing a key fact in a story, it can change the whole perspective of a story, right? What do we have? We have chapter 1 and chapter 2, where we see the reason why this is happening to Job is not because of Job doing anything wrong. In fact, God is bragging on Job, saying, "Hey, look at my guy Job. He's one of my proud saints, saints that I'm proud of." I mean, can you? And yet, because of that, because of his goodness and how he's doing what is right, that causes this situation to happen where God allows him to be tested, God allows him to be put through this time of pain and anguish and grief for an ultimate purpose for Job to learn at the end, have a greater understanding of who God is and how he uses suffering and blessing and such that he doesn't currently have. And sometimes we can't get that except through experience. And so Eliphaz, his basic thing is, yeah, God's just, and he punishes. In other words, he's going to say he blesses the good and he punishes the bad. So if you're facing punishment or you've lost everything, then it must be because you did something wrong. It can't be just because God's using it for his purposes. And so we see this very kind of linear black and white kind of understanding here. And yes, there are things in the Christian life that are black and white, right and wrong. But we also know that God is a God who works in many, many different ways. There are mysteries of God that we will never understand on this side of eternity, not creation, but this side of eternity. And so we're going to see some of that here. And so Eliphaz is called out to him, said all these things, which a lot of it's theologically good. God is this. He's a God of justice. He's a God of this. But he keeps putting it back on Job. Job, what have you done? What have you done to violate how things? If you would just make things right, if you would just seek out this hidden sin that obviously you've committed, God would restore everything back to you. And we're going to find it's not that easy. So in other words, we can't look at a person going through suffering and go, that's sin in their life. There must be some sin in their life. This is the problem the Pharisees had and many of the Jewish people of Jesus' time had. They would see suffering or sickness or loss or whatever it might be as a sign of God's judgment on them for some secret sin that they had. But that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we need to have perspective and we have to have the Holy Spirit working in our hearts and lives. So we need to be careful when we cast judgment on things that we don't know anything about. And in fact, God is going to rebut his three friends, what they say to him, their counsel, as being incorrect, that they're going to speak incorrectly about God's very nature. And so in chapter 6, we pick up, this is Job responding to Eliphaz, and he's gonna first say, my grief, if it could be weighed and put on the scales, it would outweigh the sand of the seas. That's how great that's a lot of weight. And he's saying, that's how my grief is right now. And I've been pierced. Why has the Almighty, meaning God, why has he pierced me with arrows? And my spirit drinks their poison. It's like the idea of like poison darts, right? Now, who else do we have described as attacking us with fiery darts? Fiery darts of the devil, right? So we see that, but he's seeing this way. God's terrors are on me. And then he makes a comparison to a donkey or an ox that has plenty of food. They don't worry about things when they have plenty of food. He says, is there any is bland food eaten without salt? Of course, salt brings out the taste in food. Is there any flavor in an egg white? I mean, obviously he wasn't on a low carb diet, right? He doesn't want to eat just the egg whites. He wants the yellows. He wants the whole thing. And he says, there's no flavor in that. And he says, I refuse to eat bland food, and I refuse to eat the egg white because they're like contaminated food. And he's making the parallel to here that Eliphaz's words are like bland food or like a simple egg white. There's nothing to it. There's no good to it. Yes, it may have some substance to it, but it didn't help in his situation because he was expecting for them to bring some words of comfort to him, to speak some comfort to him. There's a time for speaking truth, but there's also a time for speaking comfort to people. Not comfort and compromising when it comes to sin, but it's sometimes there's a tactful way to do it. And we're going to see Eliphaz is going to be the one that has probably the most tact. We're going to see another one of his friends today has less tact than even Eliphaz does. But he's just going to say, why won't the Lord just crush me? Why won't the Lord just end my life and end my suffering? right? And that's why, why won't he just do this and bring comfort to me? I want comfort. And so he's looking for comfort in words from his friends, but he doesn't get anything. He's like, I was expecting this from my friends. I feel abandoned by both the Almighty and my friends. Kind of like that little line in A Christmas Carol, Jacob Marley shows up to Ebenezer Scrooge, and he's all fearful and scared. And he says, Jacob, speak some words of comfort to me. And Jacob Marley says, I have none to give you, right? Well, in some ways, Job's friends here had no really words of comfort to give him. And he compares them to streams that overflow. He compares it to this situation to snow water, snow melt. That's another reason why maybe they think the location might be more in that area where Lebanon is, because there would have been the ability to see snow, whereas in other places that wouldn't have been the case. But we see this comparison there, and so he says, you become just like all of these things. You become all of these things. You think it's so easy. You think it's so formulaic. If I would just cleanse myself, then everything would be set right, and that I would be delivered and be redeemed. He says, and if you have genuine instruction, I'll be silent, but your words are painful. What did your rebuke to me prove? Did you prove anything with that? Do you think you can do that with me? He said, I will. He said, but now please look at me. There's kind of the indication, because he's in such a bad state, that his friends are there talking to him, but they won't even look at him. They just kind of have their face down and almost judging him by their inability to look upon him. And he says, reconsider, don't be unjust. My righteousness is still the issue. Is there any injustice on my tongue? Can my palate not taste disaster? So in other words, look at me. If you're going to be here with me, be with me, look at me, and speak to me in a way that I need to hear right now. And so then we transition to chapter 7, and he makes the comparison to a hired worker or a slave, and how they work and such. And then he gives a description of himself, of his condition. He says, my flesh is clothed with, sorry for the description, maggots, because of the infection and the running sores on him. I'm encrusted with dirt. My skin forms scabs and oozes. I mean, he's just saying all this. And then he says, he compares his days. So that's the condition he finds himself in. And it's very, very, very difficult. And he says he's consigned to forced labor, as he said, and there's also the idea, he gives kind of the comparison almost to like a soldier, a military force and such. We're going to see that as well. But he makes this comparison to his days being like a weaver's shuttle. They come to an end without hope. It's the idea that his life is like a weaving apparatus that's come to its last thread. It's stretched out. He says, remember that my life is but a breath. It's just here for a little bit. And he says, I'm never going to see anything good again. The eye of anyone who looks at me will no longer see me. They're only going to see my despair and my loss and what I've become. Your eyes will look for me, but I will be gone. As a cloud fades and goes away and vanishes, so the one who goes down to Sheol, never to rise again. I mean, he said, I'm never going to return to my house. No one's ever going to remember me, who I was. He said, I'm going to try to restrain my mouth. I'll try to not speak, and I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. He's just going to say, I'm going to speak real. I'm going to speak it from my heart. And it's interesting, because we look at some of what Job says and we go, man, why would God allow him to speak like this? But we're going to find out at the end that Job's words are found to be more pleasing than his friends' words are. I think sometimes God appreciates the very raw language, honest language we have with God. He would rather us be honest with him than to put on flowery words and try to put on a show and try to say the things we think God wants to hear. We shouldn't be speaking vile things, obviously, but sometimes the true honesty of our emotions, we need to share those things. We even see Jesus himself was honest in his emotions and honest in his feelings about things. He would speak speak the truth and speak the way he was feeling. He describes again how his bed, he says, I get no comfort from my bed and couch. In other words, he has the inability, he can't sleep. He's in so much pain and grief, he can't sleep. And he's also afraid to go to sleep, because when he goes to sleep, he has bad dreams and night terrors and nightmares. And I'd rather be strangled to death than to remain alive in this body. He says, I will give up. I will not live forever. Leave me alone for my days. So in other words, God, this is how extreme he's getting. God, I would rather die. I'd rather be strangled to death than to be left in this condition. Or at the very least, if you will not take me out of this world, Lord, leave me alone. Put your eyes on someone else and leave me alone. Let me not suffer like this always. And he's going to ask the question, what's a human or what's a man that you think of, that you think so highly of him and you pay so much attention to him? In other words, who am I that you're focusing so much of this on me? You inspect me every morning and put me to the test every moment. Will you ever look away from me? In other words, when will your gaze not be on me? Of course, we know God's gaze is on every human being every moment of every day because he can see all, he knows all, he has a plan working through it all. We can only see the moment we're in. We don't see the entirety of God's plan working. It's like, will you ever leave me alone long enough for me to just swallow? Like, it's kind of a phrase like like a blink, just for a second, for a moment, for a fraction. If I've sinned, what have I done to you? In other words, he is going to say, if I have sinned, if there's some sin I'm not aware of, what have I done that has brought this on me? Will you not forgive my sin and pardon my iniquity? Will you not forgive me? Because soon I'm going to go to the grave, and you will eagerly seek me, but I will be gone. So we see this despair. He's like, what have I done? Who am I that you focus this on me? I'd rather you take me out of this world. If you're not going to take me out of this world, would you at least take your eyes off me and leave me alone for a while? Give me a moment's peace. And if it is sin, would you let me know that? But Job knows that he's done nothing to be the cause of this, even though his friends are going to not believe that. And then we get in chapter 8, we meet Bildad, one of his other friends, who's going to be much harsher than Eliphaz was to him. He's like, how long are you going to go on saying these things? In other words, how long are you going to go on complaining to God? Your words are like a windstorm. They're just a bunch of hot air. Does God pervert justice? In other words, who are you to question God's methods here? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? Since your children, now watch this. Just remember, we're just days removed from Job's children dying, right? They die in speaking of wind, a windstorm. He says Job's words are like a windstorm, but a windstorm comes in and knocks down the house his children are in during a celebration. They're all killed. He says, since your children sinned against him, he gave them over to their rebellion. Whoa. In other words, your children are dead because of something they did wrong. They're dead because of something they did wrong. Or perhaps they're dead because of something you did wrong. But he's going to say that. But God's allowed you to live. He didn't give them mercy. He took them out because of the sin that they had done. But if he's extended your life, he's allowed you to live. If you'll just seek his mercy, he'll make everything right. How often have we had that thought of something, Lord, what have I done that's caused something to happen to my child? And I know I've said this a lot, and I don't want to beat it to death, but I had those questions when my daughter, in just full transparency, when my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia at 5.5 months, and we went through that 2-year battle. I questioned the Lord all the time. God, why is she being punished? Is there something I did that's causing her to be punished? I had a warped understanding. We're going to see Job has he's going to develop a very twisted sense of who God is and how God is working, probably because of the pain that he's under, the suffering that he's under, the mental anguish that he's under. I can relate to that a little bit. I can remember lying in bed going, Lord, what have I done? What have I done that caused you to bring this disease on my daughter? When that was never the reason why my daughter had the disease. God was working his plan in her life. He knew what her life was going to be brief on this world. And that for whatever, that's his. And I had to get to a point where I trusted him in that. And there were times I laid in bed going, Lord, punish me, don't punish her. If it's something I've done, take me out, but let her live, heal her body. That whole trade. Do it to me, let her, that a father or a mother will often do and try to bargain with God. But that wasn't God's plan. It wasn't anything she had done, and it wasn't anything I had done. It was just the nature of the life God had determined that she was going to live. And it was her journey that she was going to take. And it was shorter than I would have liked on this earth. But I know, because where she's at and where I'll be one day, I'll have all eternity with her to catch up. So it doesn't mean I don't miss her every day. I certainly miss her every day and wish I could see her right now. I wish I could call her up. I wish I could hug her. I wish I could do all of those things. But this life is brief, and I know that I get through this life to the life to come, and then I will see her again. So, but I mean, he's going to say your children did because of something they did, obviously. And if you are pure and upright, then you will move now on your behalf. In other words, you should be on your hands and knees begging God for forgiveness for the sins in your life that have obviously caused you to suffer. And if you do this, though your beginnings were modest, you will end with prosperity. This idea that if you just would have enough faith, if you just do what is right, God will just bless you and prosper you. That's kind of the idea here. Now we're going to see he is going to be blessed and prospered, but that's not. We see that his friends think that there's some easy 2 + 2 = 4 formula. If you do A, then God is automatically required to do B. When sometimes we do A and God chooses to do D or F or G or whatever. Or sometimes he does do B, right? Sometimes 2 + 2 in God's equation does equal to 4. But sometimes he's working in other ways that we can't see. And that's where trust comes in. And then he starts to make a comparison to a papyrus. The papyrus, kind of grows up and it has all these things, or a spider's web. These things that come up, but they don't last. They come up, they shoot up, and then they're gone away. And he said, surely this is the joy of his way of life, yet others will sprout from the dust. Look, God does not reject a person of integrity, and he will not support evil doers. He will fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with joy. In other words, if you would just get your mind right, Job, and if you'd set things right, you could be happy again. You could smile again. No person going through grief and suffering wants to be told, just look on the bright side of things. Nobody wants to be told that. Nobody wants to. It may be true eventually, but in that moment, that's not good advice. It's terrible advice. And he said, in other words, if you would just do this, if you just think about this differently, Job, if you would just change your mindset. Sometimes we have to work through the mindset of grief and suffering, and that can take time. And not everybody is on the same. Some people it takes days, some people it takes weeks, some people it takes months and years to work through a process of grief and suffering and such. Not that we wallow in it, but all of us have a different journey. I have a different race to run. We're not all running the same race. But we trust God and we work through the process there. And I truly believe that God never wastes a hurt. Anything that we go through, any experience in life we go through, whether good or bad, painful or not painful, God uses it all. It becomes who we are and allows us to then minister to others. If you've never suffered the loss of a child, then you can't speak to a mom or a dad who's losing or has lost a child, right? If you've never lost a job, you can't speak to somebody who's unemployed. If you've never had a financial hardship, it's hard for you to understand a person who's going through a financial hardship. If you've never had a life debilitating disease or handicap, it's hard for you to. So in other words, we go through these things so that we can empathize, so that we can celebrate with those who celebrate. We can grieve with those who grieve. We can sorrow with those who sorrow. God uses it. We just have to see that, but we have to go through these experiences to sometimes to then be able to be used by God to minister to those people. And obviously, his 3 friends had never been through anything like this. So they're not speaking from any bit of experience. And you'll notice this too. They never one time pray or call out to God or anything. They're just going off of their own advice that they think that they have enlightened wisdom. That for some would seem to be wisdom, but in this application is not. And so in chapter 9, we see Job is going to respond back to him. He's going to say, I know a lot of what you said is true, but how can a person be justified before God? How can one be made right? If one wanted to take him to court, in other words, if you wanted to sue God for what he's doing to you, how could you stand and make accusation to God? Like, who is a sinful being to accuse God? Now we're going to see eventually Job is going to accuse God, and he's going to have to repent of that sin, but he hasn't got there yet. He's making this, if we stand in a courtroom, who am I, little creature made out of dust, to accuse God, the one who has it all under control, who put it all in place, who gave the very breath of life to me? He's like, God is wise. God is all powerful. Anybody who opposes God never comes out of this unharmed. He does he shakes the earth with his presence. He commands the sun not to shine, and he seals off the stars. He stretches out the heavens. So he's giving the very description of God as the creator. He set everything in motion. He watches everything. He does all of these things. If he passed by me, I wouldn't see him. If he went by, I wouldn't recognize him. If he snatched something, who can stop him? Who can ask him, what are you doing? In other words, and don't we do that a lot of times? Like, God, what are you doing? Where are you in this situation, right? How are you working in this, Lord? But God doesn't hold back his anger, and there's times when God will say, and he's going to see this. God's going to respond at the end of this book. And he's going to be like, were you there when I created all these things? How dare you challenge me? And he's like, and he says here rightfully, how can I answer him? Even if I were right, I wouldn't be able to answer, because if I answer him, I'm going to answer out of my own pride and arrogance, and that's going to lead me to sin before God. The only thing I can do is beg for God's mercy and for him not to judge me as he has the right to judge me. Even if I were right, my own mouth would condemn me. If I were blameless, my mouth would declare me guilty. Though I am blameless, he's going to say once again, I've not done anything worthy of what I'm going through. If you're saying that the punishment we received, in other words, the punishment fits the charge, if you're saying I have not done anything that would be worthy of all this suffering I've gone through. And so therefore you can't look at it and say A equals B here in this situation. And he says, my days are going by faster. They're just flying by. They sweep by. And so we kind of see him again, just wrestling with the struggle that he's dealing with. If I wash myself with snow and cleanse my hands with lye, then you dip me in a pit of mud and my own clothes despise me. Even if I tried to make myself clean through worldly, I would be right back in the mud of my sin again, and I would still be unclean. For God is not like a man that I can answer him. We can't take it. We can take each other to court. And then he's going to make this interesting statement. There is no mediator between us to lay his hand on both of us. What's a mediator? There's another legal term there, right? Somebody who comes in, you've got two parties that have a disagreement, and you bring in a mediator to mediate between the two, right? One will talk to the one to talk, and come up with some agreement to bring these two parties together, right? A lawyer oftentimes will be a mediator, right? Or there'll be other cases where this happens. But he's like, there's nobody that can bridge this gap between God and man. There's no, why? What's the gap? The gap is the sin of man. There's no mediator. Oh, but guess what? Job didn't know quite yet. He's like, there's no mediator, but guess what? There's one that's coming. Paul would write about him in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Who is our mediator? For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all, a testimony at the proper time. Jesus Christ is our mediator. He's the one that bridges the gap. He's the one, because of what he did on the cross, that now puts God and man, it can put God and man back into right relationship, as long as we confess our sins and accept his work on the cross for us. And so even Job is identifying, there's no one to take my case to God and to work this out between us. And he's like, I'm in fear to speak up on my own behalf, because who am I to speak? Because once I begin to talk and once I begin to speak, I will invalidate my case. And then chapter 10, we see kind of a repetition of what he said in chapter 3. I'm disgusted with my life. I'm just going to continue to vent out my complaint in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not declare me guilty. Let me know why I'm going through this, right? How many times have we asked that question? Why, Lord? Why am I going through this right now? Why have you allowed this to happen? Is it good for you to oppress me? And then he's going to make a series of questions. Do you have eyes like a human sees? Do you look for my iniquity and search for my sin, even though you know that I am not wicked? Again, I'm not perfect, but I know that I have not done anything justifying of this, that there is no one who can rescue from your power. Your hand shaped me and formed me. Will you now turn and destroy me? You created me. Why are you now wanting to destroy your very own creation? You formed me out of the clay. We see here Job had an understanding of the creation story. Obviously, he knew that man, was created out of the dust of the ground. And he makes a comparison to that. He makes a comparison to cheese and clothing and such. You knit me together. You concealed my thoughts, all of these things. I know that this was your hidden plan. If I sin, you would notice and would not acquit me of my iniquity. If I am wicked, woe to me. And if I am righteous, I cannot lift up my head. I am filled with shame and have drunk deeply of my affliction. If I'm proud, you hunt me like a lion. You produce new witnesses against me. Why did you bring me out of the womb? I should have died and never. There we go. We go back to that idea of being stillborn. I should have never been brought into this world. I wish I had never existed, but had been carried from the womb to the grave. Are my days not few? Stop it. Leave me alone so that I can smile a little bit. In other words, take this off of me for a little while so I can feel some happiness before I go into the land of darkness, before I go into the land of death, is basically what he's describing, this land of blackness, like the deepest darkness. This is also referred to as the valley of the shadow. And it may be a parallel to when the psalmist wrote in Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that deep darkness of chaos, where even the light is like the darkness, that grave. And again, we see some mixed ideas that Job's going to have through this process of his understanding of what lies on the other side. Now, he's going to at one point in this book, he's going to say, I know that my Redeemer lives and that he stands, and that one day I will see him again. I will see him in the flesh, face to face. So he eventually kind of gets the right idea. But even now, he's just like, I'd rather go to the darkness of the grave than continue in this world, so that I can just be over with. If you're done with me, God, if you're going to destroy me, have it over with. and let me go into this deep, dark abyss of the grave and be done with this. And so we end chapter 10 here again. It's not one of these stories that leaves you on a high when you finish reading about it, right? It can be dark and depressing, but we can take comfort to know that nothing we have gone through or will go through in our life is not something a person like Job hasn't experienced, right? And we know that there's nothing new under the sun. Humankind, from the very beginning and the fall, have gone through all kinds of sin and grief and pain and such. I mean, right at the beginning, Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden. Their first two children, right? Cain and Abel. What happens? Abel was righteous. God accepted his offering, but yet his own brother rose up against him and killed him and destroyed him and spilled his blood. You'd look at that and go, well, wait a minute. Why was the righteous allowed to die and be destroyed, right? But it was part of God's plan. And Cain, of course, goes into exile, and we have, and then we have this child Seth who comes up. So we see this, that there are times that God allows the people of God to suffer injustice sometimes. But we know that one day God is going to make everything right. One day the scale of justice from our eyes may seem to be out of whack, but one day God, the perfect judge, the perfect one of justice, is going to step in. He's going to make all things right. He's going to make every wrong right one day, and we trust him with that. And so we look at this and go, we take some understanding that Job is going through this deep, dark conversation of pain and such. And so we just have to keep that in mind as we're going through this, and understanding that he had a little bit of an imperfect knowledge where he's at, whereas we can look through the entirety of Scripture. We can have a little better understanding of suffering and pain and such, and the eternity to come. So I hope that helps you a little bit. Tomorrow we'll pick up in chapter 11, where the third of his friends, Zophar, is going to speak. And again, it's not going to be a great conversation for him. And we'll see again this conversation continuing between his friends talking and Job's reply back and forth. So again, we just kind of have this dialoguing back and forth, and one side trying to say one thing, Job's responding. That's not helping a whole lot. And so we kind of see that as we come to the end of our reading for today. So again, hope that's helpful to you. We'll see you back here tomorrow for Job chapter 11. God bless. See you then.